Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Grant Cameron, and I'm here with a special guest from Canada. We actually have 3 Canadians on the air today. I have my assistant, Sinead Wellahan. How you doing, Sinead?
I'm doing very well, thanks, Grant. How are you tonight?
Beautiful. I'm doing fine. And we're interviewing a friend just down the road from you there in St. Catharines, and that is Steve Boucher. Now, I've interviewed Steve Boucher 3 times, and I encouraged him to do a book, and his book is now out. And I was racing through it I had it for about a day and a half. I'm racing through it, and I found a bunch of new stories that I'd never heard before. And so we said an hour. It may go a little bit longer than an hour, but we'll try to do short versions of these stories so that people can read the book and read all the stories. I was very impressed with the book. It's very well written. And I congratulate you, Steve. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, does it feel good to have the book finally out?
Oh, yeah. I've been, well, when I first got the idea to do that book, I think I was about 14.
Wow.
So
this is a lifetime, is this, I'll get into it later, but do you think this is part of the mission that you came here to do?
I think so, yeah, because, well, it took so long, and I held on to my story for over 45 years. I didn't talk about it publicly. It had originally been investigated by Bud Hopkins. He invited me to his art studio in Manhattan, and then it was taken over by the Canadian UFO Research Network. When I came back to St. Catharines after that, I hooked up with them at a MUFON symposium in Toronto. And it was a pretty good symposium. I was a little pressed for time, but I did get to see J. Allen Hynek. He was standing there with his pipe talking to somebody, and I wish I had gone over and shaken hands with him, because I never got to do that. He was speaking there.
This was 1982 in Toronto, correct?
I believe so. It's, around that time.
Okay, let me start with a PowerPoint. I'm going to take over the screen here.
Okay.
And we'll just sort of go through a couple of slides that'll get me into what I want to talk to you about here.
Sure.
Now I've got to take over the screen, share screen, share. And here we go. Let me make this big here.
Yep.
Hang on. Oh, okay. I can't make the big screen big here. What's going on here? Hang on. Okay, we'll just do it like this. So, because here's your book, and Desta helped edit the book, and you worked on it for quite a while, and it tells quite a few stories. As I pointed out, we're going to get into some of the stories, but you've had a lifelong experience. You've had how many regressions? 15 regressions to pull this story?
Well, at least 12. I kind of lost count after a while. You know?
Okay. So this is the cover of your book, and I recommend everybody buy it, because even though you had the one YouTube video that did 2.2 million hits or whatever, a lot of people have heard some of your stories, but I encourage them, because there's a lot of stories here that I didn't know. I thought I knew your whole story. So that's the cover of your book, and here's you as the rock star. Is this you in 1970s when this happens?
Yeah, that was around the time when my band was abducted.
Were you the lead singer?
Yeah, I was actually. Yeah.
Oh, and what was the band called?
Harmony Grove.
Harmony Grove. Okay.
Yeah.
So this starts it actually starts before. We'll get to this in a second here. And I just want to point out to people, because you sent me some drawings before, that you actually are a very good artist here. Hang on. This is your drawing, right?
Yeah.
You find that with a lot of experiences. They're extremely artistic people. I mean, I remember, I think it was Roger Lear. They asked him what's common between all experiences. He said they're all right-brained, creative people, and there's a pile of them in Hollywood. And the last one, this is where I want to start the story with you, is this guy. Tell me who this guy is.
Well, that's Rigel. he's the commander or the leader that was the common denominator in all my experiences, basically. And I did the drawing in color. I have a color copy of it here, but I won't show it right now because
well, they'll have it in the book. So you meet him. Yep. Let's start with this story. You meet him before you're actually born. Can you tell that story?
Yeah. That was the pre-birth experience that I had, and it was a memory that came out when I actually remembered part of it consciously when I was in the parking lot at work one day on my lunch hour, and I was reading the Nag Hammadi library.
Yeah.
And in one of the books in the Nag Hammadi library, it talked about a place on the moon, and a high place it was referred to. And when I read about this and it sunk in, all of a sudden it seemed to like trigger a deluge of memories of this pre-birth experience. And from what I could gather, this high place where I was standing with Rigel, the commander, next to me, I viewed myself as a small human child in this incident. And we were looking out from the edge of a crater to Earth, and I could see Earth hanging there in the sky like a big beach ball. And what I thought of later that occurred to me was that it might have been the same high place that was referred to in the Bible that the devil took Jesus up to and showed him all the kingdoms of the earth, and said, if you do an act of worship to me, I will give you all this. Well, the moon is the perfect vantage point to see all the kingdoms of the earth from, because you can, the moon stays tidal locked with the earth, but the earth is turning, so you'd be able to see the entire revolution of the earth, and in fact see all the kingdoms of the earth. So it occurred to me that that was the place referred to in the Bible. But anyway, this being Rigel was standing next to me, and from my memory, I recollected that he was somebody that I knew fairly well, and he had some kind of authority, like we would give to a police officer or a soldier of rank. He had some sort of authority, and he was telling me that I had to go down there to the earth, and I didn't want to go. I was terrified of Earth. I just didn't want to go there, and I argued with him for quite a while. And he asked me, he said, well, why don't you want to go to Earth? And I said, because I've heard so many horrible things about that place. I just don't want to go there. And so he said, well, there's someone who just came back from a life on Earth. And maybe if you talk to him, he'd make you feel a little better about going there. And he said, would you be willing to do that? And I said, yes. And almost immediately, I found myself in a room, a very dimly lit room, and there was a young guy sitting in a chair in front of me. He was turned sideways. I was seeing his left side, and he was kind of hunched over. And the whole atmosphere in that room was very solemn and kind of depressing. And I walked up to this guy and I said, I heard you have just returned from a life on Earth. And he kind of nodded. And I said, well, can you tell me about it? I said, is it really as bad as I feel it is? And he said, well, it's kind of good and bad. It's both. And I said, well, is it more bad than good or more good than bad? And he said, well, he says, I'm probably not the best person to ask. And I said, well, if you had the opportunity, would you go back again? And he looked at me and he said, that's the problem. He says, I have to go back. And I said, why? And he said, because I didn't complete my mission. And at that point, I came to the realization that he had committed suicide, that he ended his mission before the proper time. And that kind of startled me. And I stepped back, and almost immediately I was back on the edge of this crater with Rigel standing next to me. And he said, well, did you talk to him? And I said, yeah, I talked to him. He said, did he make you feel better about going there? And I said, no. He made me feel a lot worse about going, you know. And so anyway, I continued my dispute about coming here with Rigel. And he told me basically that I had to go. He said it's been decreed by the council and you have to go. And I said, well, what happens if I refuse? And he said, if you refuse, he says, believe me, there's a lot worse places they could send you than Earth. And that really hit me hard when he said that, because I felt like my free will was totally being violated. And I had no choice in the matter. I had to agree. And so I asked him, I said, well, if I go down there, will you come and visit me and check on me and make sure I'm okay? And he said, well, we don't like to do that usually, but he said, in this case, yes, I will agree to that. And what I didn't realize at the time when I had done that is that I had entered into kind of like a soul contract with him, a conditional one, that I would go to Earth if he would come and visit me. And, you know, like some people ask themselves, a lot of experiencers, the question always comes up, why me? And when I had that question come up on my mind and I remembered this memory, it told me point blank why I was picked, because I had made this agreement with him to come down here. And so before I went down, he said, I'm going to tell you something that might help you. And he said, if you go down there, find the people that carry the teachings of a man named Jesus. And if you learn those teachings, when you come back up here, you'll go to a place far greater than you could ever imagine. And so I said, okay, well, I will find this Jesus. And he said, no, you won't find him because he's not there anymore. But if you find the people that carry his teachings and you learn them, when you come back here, you'll go to a place far greater than you could ever imagine. And I said, well, I'll find them then. And he said, well, I hope you do. But he said, chances are you won't remember any of this. And so I left, and I felt myself falling through this tunnel toward the Earth. And as I was falling through the tunnel, I was seeing pictures of various parts of Earth's history flashing by as I was falling through this. And then eventually I found myself in the body of this little baby. And later on, even before I remembered what he had told me, I started to take an interest in Christianity, and I was curious about Jesus. And so I became a Christian for a number of years. And then I realized that I didn't fit, that it didn't fit me for some reason. And they couldn't answer any of my questions about UFOs, and what they told me was, oh, they're just all demons. And that didn't sit well with me, because I had these memories that they weren't like demons. They weren't evil. You know, you could talk to them, you could reason with them, and it just made me think, like, if they're all demons, then why, out of all the trillions of planets that are out there and the billions of stars, or how many there are, I don't know, why would God populate all those planets with demons and only put humans on Earth? You know, it didn't make any sense to me at all. And I've had people tell me that, oh, you know, aliens or demons, you should stay away from that stuff. And I
Can
just
I ask
never,
you a related question? Because
sure.
you told him, how long do I have to stay on Earth? Wasn't that correct? And what did he say?
Yeah, I asked him, how long will I have to be there? And he said, oh, not long, about 60 to 65 years. And I said, 65 years? I can't stay there that long. And that just scared the heck out of me. So what that told me when I remembered this was that even in that state, which I don't believe was 3D, I believe it was like a fourth dimensional or a fourth density state, there was still a concept of time, because I knew how long 65 years was, you know.
So how old are you now? Because that was what occurred to me when I read that, because that's your age.
Yeah.
Are you planning to check out, or are you tired of being around?
Well, I'm 65 now, so there's a possibility that I could check out this year. I don't know, you know, but
Was it as bad as you thought it would be?
it's worse. It's worse than I had anticipated. I've had this has been a really rough incarnation for me. Like, I've
Another
had
question.
my share of health problems.
Yeah, another question related to that is, you made a deal with him to come, and I didn't know that until I read your book. So my
Yeah.
question to you is, if you made the deal for him to come, was the incident that happened in 1971 on the 401 a random event, or was that a part of a deal that you made with him? Like, I'll be on the 401, you come down, you abduct me, and I'll pretend I don't know what's going on, I'm scared, and all this kind of stuff. Was that an agreement? Have you got an agreement with them? And more direct, I mean, are you one of them? Are you, because you'll hear people talk about the fact that they believe that their real family is the people that abducted them. So is there a possibility you were a gray last time, or that you may, when you die, you're going back to the grays, that you're part of a plan that they have?
Well, okay. I sort of view them as custodians. Like, when you die, they show up and they take you and get you set up for your next life, and download memories and whatever you need to go back into the wheel of karma again. And so that's the way I perceive them, and I expect that I'll see them when I do cross over, you know. But I don't feel there's a possibility that I could have been one in a previous incarnation. But I feel that I came from a different planet, that I was captured by the Greys, because I perceived myself in a small body, like of a young child, that was basically human. And so I would have been probably captured from one of the more human-like extraterrestrial groups and brought there. So
Okay, but do you believe it was a random event where you were a victim of an abduction, or did you have something to do? Because and the other thing I saw in your book that I didn't realize is they have this agreement where they're talking to your subconscious mind in this regression, and your subconscious mind is playing along with the whole game. It's saying, no, I can't tell you. I can't tell you. This will ruin Steve. There's a mission. I can't tell you. So when I was reading your book, it occurred to me that this seemed to be all sort of part of a plan that you may not remember. It's like, Steve doesn't know this, but I'm not going to tell you this. It'll ruin it. Where they're talking to your subconscious mind as if this is all like a play. And you'll hear the experiencers say that when you regress them. Did you agree to be in this situation? And they say, yeah, I agreed to this. This is part of my mission. And they did give you a mission, correct?
They did give me a mission, but I don't feel that I got that mission until the incident with my band, because he was standing in the doorway of the craft, and I could see him silhouetted in the doorway with the light from inside the craft behind him. And he was giving me some sort of instructions, like a program or whatever, I don't know. But he was giving me some kind of telepathic instructions. And when I finally came to, I found myself standing in the parking lot of this restaurant, and it was by the Queen Elizabeth Highway, by the way, not the 401.
Okay.
But anyway, there's a restaurant that is there that has changed hands several times, and ironically, around that time, it happened to be called Admiral Byrd's Restaurant, which I found very strange, But this was in the parking lot outside the restaurant where the event occurred, and all the other, after the incident, I won't go into it because I've told it many times before, and there's lots of videos that explain it, but as well as my book. But at the end of the incident, everyone else went back to the van, and I was the last one to leave, and I was still pondering over this question that I had asked him about what was the true religion on earth.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't go into details on it. He said, that's the end of the questions and answers. And I said, well, wait a minute, I'd like to know more. Like, can you elaborate on it? And he said, no. He said, we probably told you too much already. And
but that was the same, wasn't that the same being that you were on the moon with, Rigel? Or
I believe it was.
Didn't he tell you on the moon that you had a mission, that you had to go down there to do some sort of mission?
Well, in the pre-birth memories, I don't remember him giving me a mission. That's not to say that he didn't, but I don't remember that.
Okay.
I only remembered getting this download of instructions in the parking lot outside the ship at the end of the van incident. And the rest of my band had gone back to the van. I was the last one to go.
Okay.
And I was about to go down the steps, and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, wait a minute. He says, I want to talk to you a little more. And so I stayed behind. And I lost consciousness at that point. And when I came to, I was standing in the parking lot looking up at him in the doorway of the ship. And he had been telling me something. And I was trying to remember what it was. And what that felt like was, if you have a really incredible dream and you're waking up from it and you're trying to remember what the dream was about, and you're grasping at it and it's just disappearing. And that's what it felt like to me. And I couldn't get the memory back. And he realized that I was struggling, and he didn't want me to know what he told me consciously at that time. It was a seed he planted in my subconscious, and it was to come out later at the appointed time. And so to distract me from that, he came down from the ship, and he came up to me in the parking lot. And he said, at this point, my face was itching, and I went to scratch it, and I found out that it was soaking wet. And I realized that I'd been crying, and I couldn't remember why. But just before he came down, I felt this tremendous love radiating from him that I've never felt from any human being or any other being before. It was like an incredible feeling of unconditional love. And then he came down into the parking lot, and he came up to me, and he said, wasn't there something you wanted to show me? And I had my bag of recorders with me, the instruments that I play. I'll just show you what they look like here.
Okay.
This is the tenor. That's the one that I put together for him. And I showed it to him, and I played a little bit for him. handed it to him. And he did something really strange at that time that I wasn't expecting. And he took it and he was about to put it up to his mouth, it looked like. But instead, he bypassed his mouth and went right up to his nostrils. And he blew into it with his nostrils and he got some sounds out of it. And I thought that was really strange. And I found out later on when Q-Form took over the investigation of my case, they showed me an autopsy report done by Leonard Stringfield. And in that report, it was, I believe it was one of the aliens from Roswell. And he stated in the report that their throat stops. It's like a pocket. And it's almost like a suggestion that there was a digestive system at one time, but they don't have a digestive system like we do. So for them, this would have been probably like the way we would view an appendix, you know. Yeah. It's like a remnant of something that was there at one time in their physiology.
Okay.
It was no longer there. And I don't believe that the lower jaw or mandible is movable.
Yeah. I
think that it stays connected to the skull and it is unable to move. So the mouth is like a pocket.
Yeah.
And they have one organ that acts as the lungs and the heart and the liver. And they can only breathe through their nose, according to the report that I read. And that answered my question as to why he put it up to his nose to play it instead of his mouth. So.
Okay. Sinead may have a question, but just to clarify, if people have never seen your videos, which probably everybody's seen them, but we're talking about the experience where you and your whole band are taken on board a ship in 1971. So Sinead, do you have a question?
I do. Yeah. Thank you, Grant. Steve, this is in relation to pretty much what you were just discussing, you know, how you had this experience of being with Rigel before you came into this particular lifetime. You didn't really have a choice, and you had to go down to Earth, whether you liked it or not, pretty much. And then also this sense of having a mission. So I noticed that on your Facebook page, because we're friends on Facebook, you identify yourself as an artist, as a musician, you know, an author, other things, and a starseed. So I was curious about that in relation to what we're discussing right now. And I was wondering, in your experience and understanding, what would you say that a starseed is?
Well, to me, a starseed is someone that's in a human form right now, but their spirit didn't come from Earth. It came from another place in the galaxy or in the universe. And I have suspected that I may have been at one time a Pleiadian or possibly Arcturian. I don't know. I don't have full recollection, but I know that my spirit comes from somewhere else, that it's not from here. And I feel that I have a family somewhere, and that I was abducted from that family and taken and sent to Earth against my will.
What would you say in terms of being given a mission? Because what I've heard is that the majority, if not all, of people who identify as being a starseed, they feel that they have a mission, they have a specific purpose in being here on Earth. And I thought that they would have chosen to come deliberately. Your experience has been different. So do you feel like the mission you would have as a starseed is the same or similar to the mission that you would have been given by Rigel in terms of your purpose on Earth?
I think it's the same, but I only remember getting this download of information from during the incident with my band. But that's not to say that I might not have been given some pre-programming before I was sent here, but I just can't remember it consciously.
Just for you're a good regression subject. Have you ever read Dr. Michael Newton, the Journey of Souls, Life Between Lives, all that kind of stuff?
I've read
where
two of
I
his
think
books.
you'd be a good client in terms of, because you have 35,000 regressions done, and they go through this whole thing about exactly what's happening before you come into the earth. It'd be interesting for you to get a Newton regression in St. Catharines or Toronto or somewhere and see what they get. Have you ever been regressed to go to past lives and stuff like that, or between lives, the soul world?
Once. It was like a recent regression that I had from a lady in Grimsby that did it for me. But I'm familiar with Dr. Michael Newton's books. I've read two of them, and I've read quite a few other books. I read a lot of Dolores Cannon's books. I'm a big fan of hers. And she kind of deals with the same sort of material that Dr. Michael Newton does. But Dr. Newton, he kind of deals with the space in between lives, whereas I found Dolores Cannon seems to deal more with previous lifetimes.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what because Newton, they go through what they call the Ring of Destiny, if you remember, before you're coming in, and how people are shown the lives and the plans and all this kind of stuff. So it'd be interesting. But let's leave that for now. And the one story I need you to tell, you've told numerous times the story about being on the ship, but the story I'd like you to tell, because I find it so interesting, is the story at Brock University with the where you go to the bar there. Can you tell that story? I find that fascinating story.
Yeah, well, if ever there was a sequel to the Van incident, that would be it. Because we had a gig. It was the same band. We had a gig at a place called Alfie's Trough, and it was the Brock pub for the students. And so every Friday and Saturday night, that pub was packed with people, you know. And we went to play there. And at the beginning, we had like a dolly kind of with wheels and a rope, and we'd put all our equipment and the drums and stuff on this dolly and pull it. And so we didn't have to carry all this stuff. And as we were going down the main hallway of Brock toward the Brock pub, I noticed something at the end of the hallway. I noticed that there were some unusual looking beings with these big heads and dark black eyes that kind of curved up around the sides of their head. And I pointed it out to the guys in the band. I said, "Hey, look at that. It looks like there's aliens or something up there." And when they saw us, they disappeared. One of them opened a door and went down into a classroom. And I had been in that classroom before. It was kind of like an amphitheater where you go to listen to lectures or whatever. And I thought, when I get up to the end of the hallway, I'm going to open that door and take a look in there and see what I can see. And I did that. When I got there, I pulled the door open and I looked in, and it was pitch black. The lights were out. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. It was so dark. So that was kind of a lost cause. So I closed the door. And then as soon as we went around the corner, they were there. There were at least three standing there. And there was one standing in what used to be sort of a little confectionery, where there was a door that lifted up on the wall, and you could buy chips and pop and stuff like that there. And he was standing there, and the light was on. And the other three immediately separated us from each other. And Anne-Marie, I believe she was the girlfriend of the guitarist. She used to go with the drummer, and then she switched over to the guitarist. And eventually they got married. But she let out kind of a scream when they approached us. And they immediately separated us from each other. And I've had that happen before. Like, it seems to be a standard protocol with them that if they're dealing with a group of 3 or more people, they separate you from each other. And it's a standard technique that the police use as well. And so anyway, the one that came to me. He said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, we're a band and we have to play at the pub out here." And he said, "Are you going to be paid for this?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, he kind of looked at the others and he said, "We have to let them go. They'll be missed." And so he said, "When you go out the door toward the pub, as soon as you go out that door, you'll forget all of this. You won't remember any of it." And so I said, "Okay." We agreed. And when we went out the door, sure enough, we'd totally forgotten about the incident. And we went to the pub. We went up the steps and banged on the door. And it took them a little while to come and open the door for us. But at that time, I was standing there and Anne-Marie was standing next to me. And I just happened to glance over the side of the railing. And I saw one of these beings walking around the corner of the building. And I said, "Hey, look at that." And she saw it. And she said, "Yeah." I said, "It looks like an alien or something." She said, "Yeah, it did." And then, we'd already forgotten that we'd just seen them about 5 minutes earlier, because they erase your memory, or they wipe your memory so you don't remember the incident. And so we went, the guy opened the door and we went in and we started setting up our equipment to play. And the guitarist, I think it was, took the dolly back to the van because we didn't have room for it there. And the stage was kind of small. So we set up all our stuff. And there was only the bartenders that were there. And it was getting close to time for us to play. So we played a complete set, basically just for the bar staff. And nobody showed up. So we asked the bartender, "When do people start rolling in here?" And he said, "Well, they should be coming in any time, like right now, because this is one of the busiest nights of the week." I believe it was a Saturday. And he said, "It's usually jam-packed with people." And nobody was there. So we played another set, basically for the bar staff, and the evening was wearing on. It was getting late, and nobody showed up. So we were kind of confused by this, and we asked the bartender, like, "Shouldn't there people be here by now?" And he said, "Yeah." He says, "Normally around this time on a Saturday night, this place would be just jam-packed." And so we were going to go up and play another set. And he stopped us and he said, it seems clear that nobody is going to show up. And he even asked us, he said, "Did you do something to piss off your audience so that they wouldn't show up, And we said, "No." And he says, "Well," he says, "I can't believe this." He says, "Usually it's jam-packed." And he said, "You might as well pack up your stuff. I'll pay you for showing up, for being here." But he said, "It's a mystery." He says, "I don't understand where everybody is." So the guitarist gave me his keys and he said, "Can you run back to the van and get the dolly and bring it so we can load the stuff on?" And I said, "Okay." So I had already packed up my stuff and I left with the keys and went back in the back door where we had originally seen them. And there was nobody in the hallway. Everything, like, they were completely clear. And I had a couple of beers in between the break, and I needed to use a washroom. So I started looking around for a washroom. And I walked down this hallway that I knew there was a washroom down there around the corner. I'd been in Brock University a few times before. And so I started walking down this hallway. And as soon as I turned the corner, there was about 150 to 200 people all standing in a lineup in the hallway. And they were all young people. And I wondered, like, what the heck are all these people doing standing here in the hallway? And at that point, it occurred to me that this was our audience. Why were they all standing in the hallway? So I went up to a girl in the lineup and I said, what are you people all standing around in the hallway for? And she said, well, the men told us to stand here and wait. And I said, what men? She said, well, there were some men here earlier and they told us to wait in this lineup and not to talk to each other. So I thought, wow, that's really strange. Were they teachers or what? So I went and used the washroom and I came back out and I was going to go up to this woman again and ask her more questions. And at that point, a guy came in through the back door and he came into the hallway and he saw me talking to this girl. And he said, you there? He said, what? You were told to stand in the lineup and wait with all the others. And I said, no. I said, you don't understand. I'm not part of this. I have to go to the van and get the dolly for the guys to load their equipment on. And he said, no. He says, well, stand there with them now and wait. And I said, I can't. They're depending on me. I've got to get the dolly and bring it to them. And he realized he wasn't getting anywhere with me. And he said, well, come with me now then. And he took me out the back door. And I was kind of curious as to what was going on here. And it was wintertime and there was snow on the ground. And in the snow, I could see like hundreds of footprints all going around the corner of this building where he was taking me. And I thought, this is really strange. And then as I was walking with him, he seemed to be becoming a gray rather than human. He was becoming more of a gray than a human. And he took me around the side of the building and there was the craft. There was like a big saucer-shaped craft parked behind Brock University on pavement. And the door was open and there were lights inside and there was a ramp going up to the door. And he took me up this ramp. And I was wondering, what the heck is this? And then a woman came to the opening and she was dressed in like a Red Cross nurse's uniform, a human woman. And she said, he said to her, can you take this guy now? Because he has to go somewhere. And she said, no, I can't take him now. She says, I got too many people in here as it is. And he said, well, he has to go somewhere. Can't you take him now? And she said, no. And he said, well, what do you want me to do with him? And she says, I don't know, take him where he has to go. So the being said, where do you have to go? And I said, well, I've been gone a little while now and they're going to wonder where the heck I am. So I should go back to the bar and explain to them what happened. And so we walked down the road behind Brock University toward the bar, Alfie Stroff. And I noticed the van parked at a door a little further down than the one that we had come out of. And the guys were there and they were loading the equipment into the van. And I thought, oh, I'm going to be in trouble. And I said, can you come with me and explain why I'm late getting back? And he said, I can't, I have to go back. They need me. And I said, well, can't you just come for a minute and explain? And he said, no. And I said, well, will you at least stand there by that tree so I can point to you? And he said, yes. He said, I can do that. And so I walked over to them. And my nickname was Boucher at that time. They all called me Boucher. And when I walked over to them, they said, Boucher, where the heck were you? We were looking for you and nobody knew where you were. And they said, you were gone with the keys. And the drummer said to me, if the guitarist hadn't had another set of keys hidden on the van, we wouldn't have been able to get in. And but he had an extra set of keys, and so they drove the van around to the back, and they started loading the equipment into it. And I said, well, I was with that guy over there, and I pointed to this being that was standing over by the tree. And as I was pointing to him, his image was fading away. He was disappearing. And they said, what guy? And I said, the guy over there by the tree. And they said, there's no guy there. And I said, yeah. I said, he was like an alien or something. And they said, oh, Boucher, and what are you laying this stuff on us for? You know, like, that's pretty lame. And I said, no, really. I said, I got sidetracked by this guy, and they, oh, come on. They didn't want to believe it or anything. And so I got in the van, and they had put my equipment in there, and they said, we were going to leave you here because we didn't know where you got to. And so I was pretty upset that they wouldn't believe me, and I knew that it was too far-fetched for them to believe it anyway. But
was it always the same set of beings that through your life? And how many encounters have you had with these beings?
Well, from what I can gather, that I can remember, there was at least 7 encounters, and they all kind of ended around the year 1976. And it was mostly the same set of beings. There was one incident that I had with a girl I was dating. I gave her the pseudonym Cindy to keep her name confidential. And they abducted us one night when I was downtown with her on St. Paul Street. And there was an old, I'm not sure if it was the Wallace's or Woolworth building. It's now the Core Block parking lot on St. Paul Street. They were tearing it down, and they had these plywood sheets nailed up to keep people out of the area. And there was one of the corners of the plywood sheets was loose, and I could pull it and open it, and I could see inside. And it wasn't really that dark at the time, so I could see in there pretty good. And we went in there to kind of fool around a bit, you know. And there was and there was a big steel desk in there, and she was sitting on this steel desk, and I was sitting beside her, and I noticed there was some movement up on there was like a, what do you call that? It was like a second story, a promenade, I guess is what
Okay.
you'd call it. And it was all dark up there, but I could see some movement. And I said, there's somebody up there. And she said, no, there's nobody up there. And I said, I saw something move. And so we sat there and we stared up at the darkness, and we couldn't see anything. So, we were making out a little bit. And all of a sudden, these beings just came out of the darkness. And there was like a group of them. And they all came over to us. And I backed away away from the desk. And all of a sudden, I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. And I fell on the ground. And I couldn't turn. I couldn't move. And I could hear Cindy calling me. And I could see all these beings around her through the corner of my eye. But I couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't move. I was just paralyzed on the ground. And a little while later, I started to be able to move again a bit. And one of the beings came over to me, and he had Cindy with him. He brought her over, and he said, you can go now. And he took us over to the section of plywood that was loose, and I pushed it open, and I went out first, and then I reached in to get Cindy, and I saw this being walking away. And I said, hey, there's somebody in there. And she said, no, there's nobody in here. And I pulled her out through the opening. And it's like we forgot about the entire incident. But the strange thing about it was that when she got home, her parents were waiting up for her. And she came in, she took off her winter coat and went upstairs to her room. She noticed that her blouse was buttoned wrong. It was all pulled out of her skirt. And I know that I'm not that careless. It wasn't me. I didn't do that. But she noticed this, and she was afraid that her parents might have noticed it too. But they never said anything to her if they did. So in that case, I don't think Rigel was part of that. I think that was, it might have been a different group or parts of the same group, but Rigel wasn't with them. And that was a more frightening, kind of terrifying encounter.
Okay. Sinead, try a question.
Sure. Yeah, actually, Steve, while I'm listening, I'm curious if these are all things that you only recovered through your regressions. I mean, how much did you remember up until you had those 3 regressions with Bud Hopkins? Could you said that you are a lifelong experience, or you've had strange things happen all your life? How much of that were you aware of before these regressions, and where are these stories that you've just been telling us? Where are they coming from? Are they coming from your regressions helping you remember these things, or did you already remember them?
Well, mostly those were coming from the regressions, but there were some that I started to remember consciously without any regression, like the incident at Brock University. That was one that I had remembered almost the entire incident consciously. And I believe the reason for that was when I was in New York, Manhattan, I had 2 hypnosis sessions done by Dr. Clamar, who did the sessions in Bud Hopkins' book, Missing Time. And then she wasn't feeling well for the time when the 3rd one was scheduled. So Bud had a key to her facility, her office, and she told him that he could take me up there and do that one himself. And the ones that she gave me, the 2 she gave me, I recorded them and later transcribed them, and they're included in my book, the transcriptions. But the one that Bud Hopkins did, the mic wasn't placed properly, and it didn't come out on the recording. Anyway, it was just muffled sounds. So there was no transcript made from that one. But some of it I remembered consciously, and some of it I needed the
reason why I'm
hypnosis.
asking is that you you had mentioned during one of the interviews I've seen of you that you had taken notes. I think the night of your abduction with the band, you had written notes down, and then something happened to them. I don't know if you misplaced them or they went missing. Can you talk about what happened with those notes?
Yeah. After the van incident, when they dropped me off at home, I went in, and my parents were asleep. It was in the middle of the night. And so I went into the kitchen. I made myself a sandwich, and I sat down with a pen and a writing pad, and I wrote down in point form all that I could remember of what happened to me during that night. And after I finished the sandwich, I went to bed, and I took that paper off the notepad, and I put it in the top drawer of my dresser, and I went to bed. And then they had been, all the way home, they had been telling me telepathically that I was going to forget, that I wouldn't remember any of that incident. And that's exactly what happened. After I went to bed, the next morning I'd forgotten completely about it. And the paper that I put in the drawer, it seemed to have disappeared. And I did find it again, eventually I have it in my, I've got like a portfolio with the incidents from the MUFON journal and from the QFORN journal as well, and also Flying Saucer Review. So I did find that paper eventually, and I had a bunch of pictures that were taken in Manhattan. There's some of Bud Hopkins and his friend Ted Boucher, and he introduced me to a number of abductees. He had like a little party before I left, and he brought pizza in and some pop and stuff, and we sat and talked about our experiences, and it was quite interesting. I was very glad. I didn't expect he was going to do that, but
well, speaking of which, if you don't mind me interrupting here, I remember you speaking about this, that you had the opportunity to meet other people, and that had been such a relief for you, right, to meet other people that had similar experiences. And
yeah.
then later on, I don't know how much time passed before this started to occur, but apparently yourself and at least one other member of this group of people that you met who were also abductees started receiving indications that you were being surveilled, and then maybe even a little bit of a threatening message was delivered to you not to talk about it, not to do anything with what you had experienced, not to make it public. So yeah. What is it that gave you the courage to finally come forward? You said you were silent for 45 years and then you decided it was the right time. What is it that gave you the courage? Because this sounds like a very large experience. That's an awkward way of putting it, but so many things have happened to you. You've had so many experiences, and there are a lot of emotions involved. There's a lot involved. And so then all of a sudden you felt able to bring this forward to the public. What is it that gave you that courage to do that, especially after being threatened and surveilled?
Well, I'm going to answer your first part of the question first. It wasn't another person from New York. It was just myself. When I came back to St. Catharines, and I went to Toronto that day for the MUFON symposium, and one thing led to another, and I met up with this group called the Canadian UFO Research Network, and they took over my case. They were very interested in it because Bud Hopkins had initially started the investigation, and the run of bad luck, I call it, happened to the QFORN group, to the investigators, and also to myself. We had a lot of unpleasant incidents happen to us, and even to the doctor that was doing the hypnosis sessions on me in Toronto. I won't get into that, but there were incidents that took place that were not pleasant, and one of them was a phone call that one of the investigators' girlfriend, she received a phone call while he was out. And when she picked up the phone, she heard this mechanical sounding voice say, "Is the male of the house there?" Not is the man of the house there, is the male of the house there. And she said, "No, he's out right now." And the voice proceeded to tell her that you and they must stop what you're doing immediately, and or there will be trouble or something like that. And as this voice was telling her that, her boyfriend came in the door, and as soon as he walked in the door, the caller hung up, and she was standing there holding the phone with this gaping expression on her face, like she couldn't believe this had happened. And she told him what happened. And I go through that in one of the chapters of my book. I elaborate on it a little more about what happened to us during the investigation. But it caused the investigation to stop for about a couple of weeks. And then we managed to reconnect with the doctor again, and the investigation resumed. So
So that sounds like a pretty intense experience, right? To go through something like that. So what, even though that was a long time ago, what did finally give you the courage to come forward?
Well, I had held on to this story for the story was published back in 1983, I believe it was, 83 or 84. And they had given me a pseudonym. I asked for them not to reveal my real name at the time because in those days people weren't quite as open-minded as they are now. And I was worried about ridicule and about possibly losing my job. So I said, no, don't give my real name out. And Grant had an experience with that where he tried to get in touch with them back in those days to find out who I was. And he talked to one of the investigators and they wouldn't give him my name. But anyway, what made me come forward with it was that I'm a senior now. I'm not getting any younger. And I didn't want to go to my grave with this story not being told. And I felt that because of all the stuff that's happening on the earth right now, there's a lot of weird stuff that's been going on and a shift in consciousness and stuff like that. And I felt if I don't tell it now, when am I going to do this? And so I went in 2016, I made up my mind that I was going to go public with it. And I didn't know if that would be a good decision or a bad decision, but regardless, I felt that this story has to be told and I have to get it out there somehow.
Well, how do you feel about it now that you've done it?
Well, I'm very glad that I did it, actually. I feel like, well, a lot has transpired, and it kind of gives me a sense of closure in one way, and that it all culminated in this book, which Grant has been encouraging me to write this book for the past 4 years. And he came up to me in 2016 when I went on the stage and I told my story for the first time, revealing who I really was to an audience of about 200 people or so. And immediately the bad luck started happening again. I got this, I lost my house. I had to sell my house because one of my clients, my only client at the time actually, was ripping me off. And I built up my line of credit to make ends meet. And I had to do something to regain the cash so that I didn't have all this debt hanging over my head. And so I decided to sell my house. At the same time, during the move, I lost half of everything that I own. I had to give a lot of it away. Some of it I sold on Kijiji and stuff like that. But I really had to downsize because I had a house with 3 bedrooms and a full basement and a shed. And now I'm in a 1-bedroom apartment with a balcony. And that's about it. And I have like a locker downstairs, but it doesn't hold
it was
much.
bad luck for you, but it was actually good luck for me because it was, for me, it was a major synchronicity where when you're standing on stage telling that story, I'm thinking, I've heard this story before. I've been looking for this guy before. I couldn't believe that. I'm in a room where I'm looking for this guy and suddenly he's standing there on stage telling this story and has come forward. So for me, it was actually good luck. Can I ask you a question? You said you had the pre-birth, you had 2 at 4, you had the incident, with the band, but you said it stopped in 1976. Do you know why? Because mostly experiences goes through their whole life. You haven't had any contact since 76, and if not, why do you think it stopped in 1976?
I think because I was disobedient. I wouldn't obey them, and when they were trying to make me forget, I was arguing with them all the time, and I said, no, I don't want to forget, because when they make you forget like that, then the next time you have an experience with them, you experience that initial fear all over again. the fear of the unknown, and it's terrifying. And I wish that they would have let me keep my memories so that wouldn't have happened. But anyway, there was, in one of the incidents, I was standing there with a friend of mine. We used to play down this ravine behind my house. And we had an experience together down there with these beings. And at the end of that experience, the being that I believe was Rigel was standing there telling me that I had to forget. And I said, no, I'm not going to forget. And I argued with him and argued with him. And he realized that he couldn't, he wasn't getting anywhere with me. And so he used a distraction technique. And he looked down at the ground and there were a bunch of dandelions in the grass. And he pointed down to it and he said, what is this flower called? And he broke my attention just for a second, and I dropped the wall of resistance. And I looked down and I said, it's a dandelion. And all he needed to do was to break that tension.
And so but you have that situation. I mean, is it possible that after 76, there's other things that happen that you just don't remember, that they blocked that? And I go back to this regression, which I was very fascinated with your subconscious mind, where it's saying, no, Steve's not ready for this. So we can't let this go. He's not ready for this yet. It would disturb the mission. So that leads to that. And the question, did you figure out what the mission is? Have you achieved the mission? Because that was always a big part, especially with the subconscious mind, it was tying in with this idea of the mission. So do you know what the mission is? And then the last question I have for you is this one about, you talk about a message. You were given this message that you now think you know what the message is.
Well, the mission, I'm still not entirely clear on what it is, because I think there's more to it, but I think the book was a big part of it.
Okay.
Writing that book was a big part of it. If it wasn't the mission they gave me, then it was my mission.
Yeah.
Because I had to get that story out. And so
and the message, what about the message? You have a message that you use. It seemed to occur to you later on that they'd given you a message and the time is now. Can you go through that?
I'm not really sure.
You're talking about the sort of the prediction that you had known about, that you sort of now are making public, that the time is now, that we're at this very serious time, and that you had sort of thought now is the time to tell it, that you had known it before?
Yeah, well, I have gotten downloads of information. The physical visitation stopped, I believe.
Okay.
In 19.
So you have had like mental interactions with them after 76?
Yeah.
Okay.
Times when I wake up at night and I can feel them flying over my building, you know. Okay. And I thoroughly believe if I was to get up out of bed and get dressed and run outside, I'd probably see a ship going by. But I never did that. I just would kind of acknowledge them, that I'm aware that they were there, and I'd just roll over and go back to sleep. So the physical instances ended around 1976, as far as I know. There could be still more instances that have happened.
What are the downloads like? What are they instructing you or giving you to do?
Well, it's more like a very strong intuition. My intuition increased tremendously. I found that I could read people as soon as I look at them. I'd know whether their intent was good or bad. Wow. I could sense that. And I tried to develop my psychic ability was growing. And so I tried to develop it. I took a course in the tarot, and I took a course in mediumship.
Wow.
And I was trying to develop that aspect, but I kind of had a falling out with the woman that was teaching me mediumship, because she actually regarded herself as my spiritual teacher, and she was trying to teach me spiritual things that had nothing to do with mediumship, and I just wasn't going to accept that. That was a deal breaker for me. But I have found that my psychic ability has increased, and that I'm attracted to people with similar abilities. One thing I discovered about it is that spirituality and psychic and mediumship are not connected necessarily. Like, just because somebody has an ability to talk to spirits or to read you psychically, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're starseeds or light workers or whatever. A lot of them don't even get involved with that. And when I first started to encounter these people at psychic fairs and stuff, I had naturally assumed that they were advanced spiritually as well. And I found out pretty quickly that a lot of them weren't. You know, they may have had those abilities, but they weren't awake in other ways.
Question for you. If you had to do it over, just the part with the encounter with the beings, would you do it again?
I'd love to. I'd love to see them again, because now that I know what I know.
But you'd go through the abduction experience, all that stuff. You would go through that all again?
Yeah, I believe I would, because for me, most of the experiences, they weren't pleasant, but they weren't unpleasant. They were just encounters with other beings. And when I was standing with these beings, and they were communicating telepathically with me, I didn't feel that they were any different from humans. I felt like there's a soul in there, and these are just regular guys that look different. That was the feeling I got from them. That actually, I felt that they were kind of like soldiers. You know, that they were probably working with our military, and I felt like they were soldiers, and that they were doing these abductions as part of their agenda. And I wasn't really sure why at the time, until I started to study more about abduction cases, and I found out about the hybrid breeding program and things like that. And then it started to make sense to me.
Do you think that was about with you? Do you think it was hybrid breeding with you? Because you have, you had a few experiences, and do you think they were all that's what it was all about?
Well, the one experience with the band that I had, I was laying on a cot, kind of like a gurney, inside the ship. And they made me look at this set of lights that were kind of, I want to say helical, but it wasn't really helical. They were like lights that kind of were in rows of concentric circles, kind of light. And they wanted me to stare into the center of this. And when I stared into the center of it, I felt myself getting woozy, like losing consciousness. And I tried to stop it. I looked at the being and I said, I don't want to look at that anymore. And he said, no, look at it. Look right into the center. It's very important. And I blacked out. So I don't know what they did to me during that time that I blacked out. So I could have been used as part of the hybrid breeding program. I don't know what they did, but I felt that they did some kind of a procedure on me that may have been a surgery of some sort, because the instruments that they showed me were like surgical instruments.
Yeah, you mentioned the unconditional love. How many times did you get that sensation from interacting with the main being? And did you ever, some people describe this sort of very intense, that they're vibrating at a higher intensity. Can you talk about those emotional things that your connection with them, especially this thing about the unconditional love that you felt from this being?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. Other people that I've spoken with, other experiencers, have claimed that they felt that love as well. And one of them told me that they felt that it was her own love that they were reflecting back to her. Now,
Okay.
I don't know, that's just her opinion, but
Yeah.
I just know that it was a very powerful feeling of love, and I wasn't expecting it. And it just, I think that's what made me start crying, and the feeling of acceptance and unconditionally, you know. And it
Beautiful.
was very moving spiritually.
Here's your book. What's the behind the title? Why did you choose the title on the
when
book?
I started writing the book, I wondered if I should give it a title, but I thought if I give it a title, then I'm going to be confined to making the book about that title.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd rather let the book take its own direction and give it a title at the end. And so that's what I decided to do. And in retrospect, I'd say that that was probably a wise decision. But how I came up with the title, Beyond the Extraterrestrial Fireball, is that I read Michael Talbot's book, The Holographic Universe, and I've been exploring a lot of the ideas from Elon Musk and that about the fact that we might be living in a holographic computer simulated universe. Yeah. And that makes sense to me because at the same time I was studying quantum physics, and I realized that we're all made up of light, particles of light. And when you get down to the tiniest particles, the subatomic level, there's no difference between me and the wall or a lamppost or you. We're all made of the same material. And I started to embrace the idea of unity consciousness. And I started exploring consciousness. And this is one of the offshoots of the experiences, because although the physical experiences ended, my journey hadn't ended. I was still learning and going into these fields of experiments. And I found that because Michael Talbot had written about the holographic universe, I realized that there was a veil between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. And I was calling it a veil. But after I read Michael Talbot's book, because it kind of referred to computer simulation, I thought that it would be more appropriate to call it a fireball. And so that's where I got the title from. Beyond the Extraterrestrial Fireball.
It's interesting that you mentioned the idea of, that's where I was talking about, this idea that we are the aliens, they are us, that we may actually be them in future or past lives, that we're all one thing, that there really is no separation. So it's kind of interesting that you were going, as I am, down this road of looking at what is consciousness, how do things actually work. How did the book work out? I mean, have you gotten fairly good interest from the book? I know you had a lot of YouTube interest in your story. How has it worked out? If people come to you with their stories?
Well, they came to me with their stories when I did the videos.
Yeah.
But the book hasn't been out long enough to really understand if that's going to happen or not. But it's been doing very well. I'm not sure how many have been selling on Amazon. I know a lot of people that I've talked to on Facebook have bought them from Amazon. Yeah. And I bought 60 copies for myself to sell from home. And I've gone through half of them at least so far. So it's been selling really well.
Yeah,
And
it's an extremely good book. I mean, I would recommend it because people may have heard your story, but you haven't heard the story. At least half of the stuff I read yesterday and today, I was not aware of. So it's much more complex. You've got an incredibly very intricate and very interesting story. Have you got anything else you want to ask, Sinead?
No, I don't think so. I just wanted to say that I really loved, Steve, your description of the higher self. You were describing it in an interview at one point that I saw, and while also talking about the firewall and your concept that the soul goes beyond the firewall when we die, right? That's where our souls are, and that's where you were when you were with Rigel initially, maybe on the moon. With your perspective of Earth, you felt like you were outside the firewall. So it was in that same kind of conversation you started talking about the higher self and how the higher self is like a diamond, a multifaceted diamond, and each facet of the diamond is a different lifetime. And so it's a separate part. It's its own part on the diamond, or its own piece of the diamond, but it's also all of them are also all part of the diamond. So I just really loved that description. I thought that was beautiful, really, really gorgeous. And I like a lot of the ideas that you're presenting. They're definitely very interesting, very thought-provoking. I mean, it's for sure worthwhile thinking about what kind of reality is our reality. What is this exactly? Is it something that's been created for us? Have we collectively created it? So you raise a lot of really interesting questions and really interesting discussion through sharing your story. So thank you for sharing your story. It's definitely worthwhile, for us, even if it's been tough for you at times. It's a really wonderful story to share, and you have so much to offer, and it raises so many interesting topics and things for people to talk about that are not necessarily the most common things that you hear in the community. There's some really unique, unusual pieces of your story that stand out. So thank you for being here and sharing it with us, and for making the decision in 2016 to come out. I think that was great.
Well, thank you. One of the things I like about Grant is he said, if you want to know what's really going on in the UFO field, talk to the experiencers, because they're the people that have actually had experience with these beings and spoken to them. And I appreciate your open-mindedness, Grant. And,
I'm surprised people still aren't doing it. They're still into the sightings, and it's almost like you can't break them out of that cycle. It's like they want entertainment. They want to see something. We've got the house and the two cars, and now we want to see some UFOs or this sort of thing. And I think, especially when you get down to what's real reality, like your story is almost like you'll see this at conferences where you go there, and the conversation always turns into what's life about, where are we going, where are we coming from, all this kind of stuff. It's the only people that really know are the people who are interacting with whatever this intelligence is. So my final question to you is, you're an experiencer who I think will be pretty prominent in history. What would you advise to somebody who's just suddenly found out that they're in this game, that they're an experiencer? What would you tell them to do in terms of handling it? Because a lot of people won't know what to do, what's going on, and they would probably listen to you if you would, from your long experience dealing with it. What should an experiencer do if they suddenly find out they're in this game?
Well, I would say to be absolutely sure that you really want to know what happened to you, because once you open that door, you can't close it again, and you're bound to find some pretty strange stuff there that might affect your beliefs, your belief structure. If you decide that you want to go ahead and find out what happened to you, then I would say hypnosis is the best way to do that. And how you find a hypnotist that would do this, like a lot of them are just straight forensic hypnotists that have no idea about anything to do with UFOs, and they're going to try and cure you, you know. Yeah. And so I would say to avoid those, and look for, in your city, do a search for hypnotherapists, and you'll get a whole bunch of names that come up. on Google or whatever, look for the ones that deal with past life experiences and regression, because even though the UFO is different from that, they're going to be more open-minded and more apt to accept your story rather than trying to cure you, you know. So that's what I tell people when they ask me, how can I get this explored? How can I find out what happened to me? I tell them to Google that. Google hypnotherapy in your city, and you'll find a bunch of names will come up. And look for the ones that say that they specialize in past life regression. Another place you can find them sometimes is at psychic fairs. I know some of the ones I've been to around here. That's how I found this woman that did the last regression for me. She had a table, and she had some of Dr. Michael Newton's books on her table. And I got talking to her, and I arranged to have a session with her.
Wow. Well, what's your future plans? Have you got another book planned, or what are you doing? Are you still working, I guess?
I'm still working. I should be retired, but I can't really afford to retire right now. I've got some savings, but not enough to last me for more than a few years. You know, so unless I'm hoping that this thing you're calling Nasara or Jasara is going to occur within the next little while, because the promise of that is that you won't need money for anything. You'll never be without money. You'll always have enough money to live and survive. And I would like to retire. I'm tired of working all my life. I'm tired of it. I would really like to retire.
Are you doing still your research in terms of writing something else or elaborating on your story?
All the time. I'm always doing research on YouTube and on the computer. And there's a lot of information that I've been getting that I have enough information to write another book. But I have to sort of find out if I can get permission to use some of this information. But just to give you a little hint, a lot of it has to do with the underground wars that are taking place in the deep underground military bases and the tunnel system that runs throughout the continent.
Okay, good. Where could people get a hold of you? And your book will be on Amazon, but in terms of people got questions for you, you're on Facebook?
I'm on Facebook. I have two Facebook accounts. One is my personal one, and the other one is just for my art. But the art one has been superseded because recently I bought a domain, and I call it experiencer.ca.
Okay.
All lowercase letters. And if you go to that domain, experiencer.ca, you'll see all my artwork, my music. I've got recordings of me singing and playing the recorder, and also my videos and my book. And the book and the website cross-reference each other. So the website's mentioned in the book, and the book is mentioned on the website. So it's a place where people can go to get more information. And
thank you, Steve. You've been a good friend, and you've done 4 interviews for me, and you've entertained me with your story, and I really appreciate your coming forward. And thanks to Sinead for helping me out. And hopefully we'll see you in Toronto if they have a conference this year, and we'll sit around a table and we'll chat some more.
I hope so. That'd be great. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it.